Okay, well, we turn now to our third speaker of the day, and we're now coming back south of the river, Lambeth Palace, which I remember the grounds first being examined with Derek Seeley very much involved, and I gather he still is very much involved in your work there, and of course it was great to discover this large open area with remains of many periods, apart from the palace, still there. So it's a pleasure to welcome Eben from MoLA, who's going to talk about some recent work there. And do better than me, which is please.
I'll try my best. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, yeah, hello, my name's Eben Cooper, and I've been working at Lambeth Palace, and we'll talk about some of the recent discoveries that we have made on the site. To give you a bit of background to the works at Lambeth Palace, they were undertaken between 2021 and 2024. They consisted of two predetermination evaluations and then a series of continuous watching brief on service trenches. This turned into a 3-year-long watching brief. The works were undertaken on behalf of the Church Commissioners for England, and during almost 4 years of field work, we excavated over 800 metres of trench and monitored more than 10% of the palace being excavated. To give you a background for those that don't know, so Lambeth Palace is the London home of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it has been for over 800 years. The manor, as it was in the 11th century, was gifted to the bishops of Rochester, and at the end of the 12th century, Hubert Walter, the Archbishop, started to construct a pre-Monstratensian abbey there. However, that was not fully completed, and that was something that we were thinking about looking for. Stephen Langton, the next Archbishop, he became the first to formally live there as his London home, and the palace sort of grew from there. In later history, we start to rebuild. The palace really takes off as the role of the Archbishop becomes more and more important, and he spends more of his time in London. Lambeth Palace is situated, yes, south of the river, but just across from the Palace of Westminster, and so that dynamic is very important of church and state. Various bits and pieces happen at the palace. During the Commonwealth, the palace is taken over, and various buildings are demolished, including the Great Hall, and this is rebuilt very soon after the end of the Commonwealth period. And in the 1828, Edward Blore decides to pull down a large amount of the palace buildings, which he describes as being sort of decrepit and sort of rack and ruin, and decides to put up a new building on the site. So this is the plan of the palace. It's a composite phase plan that we've produced as the fieldwork's only just recently finished. The red outline shows you the limit of the excavations, as you can see, the trenches run everywhere. Down to the southwest, we've got the entranceway, Morton's Tower, and it leads you into, we've got the Great Hall running north-south, and then the large building at the top of the plan is the Blore building, which was reconstructed by Edward Blore, and it sits over where the residential wing used to be. There's various other buildings, the cottages and stable yards were rebuilt as well by Edward Blore, and the excavations took us across the whole palace. So now we'll understand a little bit about the background. So we'll move on to what we found, and we'll start with some of the earliest deposits that were found on the palace. We found small amounts of residual prehistoric and Roman archaeology on site, but nothing major. But the more serious archaeology that we found starts with the Saxo-Norman period and the very beginnings of the palace and the manor at Lambeth. Throughout excavations, especially centred towards the southwest, we found large amounts of Saxo-Norman pottery buried in layers with pits and post holes. And these match up to, as we spoke about, Derek Seeley, excavations that happened in the 1980s that were very limited monitoring heating pipes. We're able to capture those in a much larger area, and we have over in where Derek dug, we have more than 20 metres of our Saxo-Norman deposits expanding across the area, and we were able to pick up, exactly where his sections were drawn from and match up layers and deposits. These really add to the picture of the early beginnings of the palace. And although we didn't particularly find much masonry associated with this early start, we found a lot of post holes and pits and a few dumps of masonry that fall in those layers, and these will hopefully be analysed in future work. Looking at the man in the front. It's worth mentioning that an unexpected find during the works was a partial human skeleton that was found beneath the guard room. This was found below medieval footings and in some of these early deposits. We have no firm dating for this, but hopefully we'll find out later on through the further post-ex where this falls, but potentially this is putting us back to those Saxon-Norman beginnings or possibly before that. Moving through into the medieval period, and this is where some of the most impressive remains were found across the palace complex. The period marks immense construction at Lambeth Palace and a real sort of explosion in the footprint of the structures here. Until recently, we only sort of recognised the chapel and the cloisters as being part of the 12th century palace, and with medieval masonry at their lowest levels, and this was mainly just in the chapel building, and the cloisters is assumed to be part of that medieval palace. However, we have found a large number of chalk walls that really expand on this. So numerous chalk walls were found. These ones here, situated outside the guard room, which really push us east of the cloisters and start to show us large wings heading out into what is now the central courtyard. To the south of the site, we found a medieval chalk cesspit, and there is a second one that we found slightly southeast of this. And again, this is pushing the scale of the palace wider and starting to give us a grander image of where all these buildings are situated and the roles in which these buildings played. Internally, within some of the 19th century constructions, we started to find chalk walls literally 20 centimetres beneath the floor layers. Some of these, the wall in the centre is 1.2 metres wide and 1.5 metres deep. 2 pneumatic breakers were broken when the contractors tried to remove a section of it. And that gives you the sense of the size of some of these buildings. This is heading directly east of the chapel, and we have not seen at present any medieval structures heading this way, but now we have large walls that form a complex of structures out this end, and potentially these are parts of a solar for the archbishop, or potentially even the great chamber, which we see in some of the court rolls mentioning that it is located somewhere towards this region. In the cloisters, we start to see the first evidence of the medieval cloisters. We found the eastern wall of the whole cloister complex with white plaster and render in situ. And we can find, we've got the corbels, so we even know the floor levels, which are not dissimilar to those today. And excavations slightly east of that start to give us a hint of other buildings that were tacked onto the side of the cloister. Slightly to the west of this being the eastern wall of the cloister, we found the internal wall of the cloister, which was again a large piece of masonry, which was seen by Derek Seeley in 1988. And we captured even more of this, and shows that there's large buildings, and these are certainly supporting higher structures, so potentially galleries over the cloister courtyard. Moving through to the Tudor period, and staying in the cloisters, directly underneath the 19th century flagstones, we find one of my favourite finds, which is the Tudor imprint in mortar of the tiled cloister alley. In the Tudor period, the cloisters undergo a large amount of changes, and we see the construction of further galleries ranging all the way around the cloister. The walls that we found step out from the medieval walls, and so show that we're starting to include weight-bearing elements to this and an expansion of what is happening there. And yes, we have this feature of, we've got the mortar imprint with a few small fragments of tile, really sort of, cheekily added on. Most of it had been removed, and so we've got this lovely diagonal pattern of glazed tiles which would have ran through the cloister alley. Within the cloister courtyard itself, within the garden, we found evidence of drainage and brickwork, which might be leading to the central pump, which is spoken about in court rolls as well. And this is something that we can find in some of the histories of Lambeth Palace, where Elizabeth I used to attend regularly, and in 1573 she attended a sermon in the cloister courtyard, where she stood in the gallery and listened to the Archbishop Parker give a sermon, and she would have stood above this very floor. Morton's Tower is another great feature of Lambeth Palace. It's built in 1495 by Cardinal Morton. Is one of the few surviving examples of early Tudor brick building. Excavations around the base of this continue to add to our information that we gained from the 1980s, and we start to see its immense stone footing situated around the building, and this footing bridges over the top of a brick culvert which we see travelling directly under the corner of the tower. The culvert was partially seen in the 1980s excavations, and now we have a complete picture and the size of it. And further work in the courtyards find that there's an entire network of culverts leading through the palace, diverting water from moats to the east through to the River Thames and taking away foul water and waste. Internally to the buildings, again, we start to see some of the Tudor constructions. The long gallery, which was built by Cardinal Pole in the 16th century. We found the internal spine wall of it running all the way down the central corridor of the current Bloor building. This is looking west and then towards the east. And interestingly, towards the end of this wall, we find that where the long gallery would have ended, we found another brick building tacked on to the end of it, which is not seen on any maps that we have found. So another little mystery that we hope to untangle, although it could be speculated that we found court rolls that describe that Cardinal Pole planted a fig tree, which was situated at the east end of the long gallery. And this may be a courtyard which held this fig tree, and the fig tree is still at Lambeth Palace today. Other buildings during the Tudor period, we get lodging chambers placed in the central courtyard, and these buildings are taking over and removing some of the medieval features that we see at Lambeth. And you can see the chalk walls cut by these red brick features. The lodging chambers were again constructed in the 16th century. And we've captured nearly all of their extent, although be it in small, narrow trenches. We've started to get a real sense of where they ran and the orientation in which they are. And so hopefully further work with historic maps, we can really align what's going on and build up a grand picture of the whole palace layout. Moving through into the post-medieval period, and again, we get a series of changes. During the Commonwealth, various parts of the buildings are pulled down, and we get a real change to where the residential buildings are and where the lodgings and the kitchens are situated. In the central courtyard of the palace, this is looking towards the Grand Bloor building that you can see there, and we start to see that lodging chambers are built to the south of the palace complex, and we move over this way. This is likely the lodging chambers built under Archbishop Tillotson, and he built a southern range of buildings for him and his wife to live in, and there is a note that says that he built a tower there in which he had a peephole installed so he could watch his staff and servants in the courtyard and ensure they were going about their business. As part of a watching brief, it was a large number of small, narrow trenches and very awkward holes to monitor. But despite this, throughout the palace, we found a large amount of archaeology. Paths and yards are something that we came across throughout the whole project, and these are just some examples of them. We've seen a lot of cobbled brick, stone paths with edging, and these give us a real sense of the spaces and the movement that is happening between buildings. And without walls, these can start to give us an idea of the routes in which people are using to travel around. In the service yard, this is to the southwest of the site. Excavations uncovered nearly the entire footprint. In blue, we can see this is what is described as the hospital building. We've got no further information on its purpose, whether this was genuinely for, hospital work. But we found nearly the whole footprint of this and internal floors, levels, and various other bits. This building is then brought down by Edward Blore during his renovation. You can see the red outline of some of the buildings that he builds, along with the cottages building to the right-hand side. Finally, a great find that we found, again, 20 centimetres under the modern-day tarmac. We have an 18th century pavement, and this is right by the entranceway into Lambeth Palace. The pavement was found with edging along one side, and so we can get a general idea of the direction, and it's heading from the entranceway straight to the Great Hall, where a disused entrance was to the southeast corner. And it's just another wonderful, straight underneath the tarmac, and shows the real level of preservation within the palace. So that about rounds it up. I have to say thank you to the team that worked really, really hard. It was quite a dynamic job, monitoring lots of very tiny holes in very awkward situations, but everybody worked really, really hard. And the wealth of information that we have gathered from these works. Again, this is the largest archaeological investigation of Lambeth Palace to date. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Eben. Yeah, many thanks, Eben. Yes, it does seem a long time ago since Derek first started work there, looking for an elusive Roman road, I seem to remember. But I mean, quite clearly, it's set in motion the possibilities of inquiring about the palace and its origins and all the buildings that you would expect to see associated with the Archbishop's London residence. So many thanks for that, Eben.